He had the #1 book in the world for 2 days. In the world. Surpassing Hillary Clinton and Oprah Winfrey. He's a New York Times bestseller. I love his work. Dale Bredesen is back on Zestology today. I'm Tony Wrighton. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It's all about energy, vitality and motivation. I'm strolling around West London at the moment by the river. There's a lot going on. There's plenty of rowers and kayaks out on the Thames at the moment. You might hear a tube going overhead. You might hear planes going on. There's a little bit of building work going on down here by the river. It's planes, trains and automobiles and rowers. But it's nice to kind of get out and about and record these intros out. And today's guest wrote this book all about the end of Alzheimer's. That was his original book. It was groundbreaking. And Dr. Dale Bredesen has a new one out which may well change the way we think about Alzheimer's and cognitive decline forever. If you listen to my first interview with Dr. Dale, you'll know that I'm a huge fan. I follow his work. I definitely live his suggestions as well. I definitely follow his suggestions. I'm a big fan of the flexitarian diet. I think it's really important to look after our brains, and one of the best ways we can do that is with diet and supplements and everything else. And in this podcast, we talk about the Apoe4 gene quite a bit. This is the gene that makes you a little bit more disposed to Alzheimer's. I've got one variant of that gene, as does about a quarter of the population. So we talk about that, the Apoe4 gene. And if you don't know if you've got that yet, you can do a 23andMe test or another gene test. We also look at fasting, 14 to 16 hours. What's good? Do you allow coffee in that time? We look at saturated fats and talk about my recent rather unhealthy breakfast. We talk good fats and histamine intolerance, omega-3s, what supplements you should take, Resveratrol, is it really that good? Heart rate variability, oxygen saturation, and the wonders of chia seed pudding. Here he is, Dr. Dale Bredesen on Zestology. Really good to talk to you again. Obviously, we spoke a couple of years ago, and then I've just been prepping for this podcast, and I realised that I pre-ordered your new book back in February. So I'm particularly keen here.
Thank you. It'll be out August 18th, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you are most welcome. I remember the first book was actually #1 on all of Amazon for 3 days, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So I was very excited. By the way, the first book is now out in 32 languages.
Oh, that is
brilliant. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 months. So things have come a long way since then. I'm very excited. This is such an exciting time because this is the first time in history when we've been able to do something about neurodegenerative disease, and I really believe this is the beginning of many of these diseases: Parkinson's, Lewy body, ALS, on and on. Where we've just had no success in the past. As they say, this is the area of greatest biomedical therapeutic failure. As people point out, everyone knows a cancer survivor. No one knows an Alzheimer's survivor. Well, we're seeing it again and again. And in fact, in 2018, we published 100 patients who had documented improvement, all of whom had Alzheimer's or pre-Alzheimer's. So this is a very exciting time.
That's great. And is it, first kind of big picture questions first. Is it, I know you're kind of, the Alzheimer's is obviously in the title of your book, but is it just Alzheimer's? Is it also kind of, I know you mentioned a couple of others there, like Parkinson's. Is it also other kind of perhaps more short-term neuro kind of conditions, like you wake up with a foggy head, for example? Can some of your recommendations help with that too?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what the new book is about. So after the first one came out, there were a couple of responses we had, and many people said, okay, this is interesting. You're saying that the research over the 30 years has suggested there's something to do about Alzheimer's disease and pre-Alzheimer's disease, but we want some more details. What about websites we need to go to? What sorts of things we need to get? What about people you've trained and people that we can go to, et cetera? And then also, just what you said, what about people who are in their 20s or 30s and would like to improve their cognition. And what we do see is that although we think of this as an end-stage process, Alzheimer's disease, just as you indicated, there are people who are not thinking as well as they could, and it has to do with these same things. There may be some ongoing inflammation. There may be poor dentition. There may be some undiagnosed sleep apnea. We're seeing a lot of people who are dropping their oxygen saturations at night, and that turns out to be an important risk factor. And one of the interesting things is that, in fact, if you look, there's a beautiful publication showing if you simply look at the mean oxygen saturation while you're sleeping, that actually correlates very nicely with specific volumes of specific regions of the brain, including your hippocampus. So there are many of these things. The insulin resistance we have, the poor food that we're eating. I've actually just been going back and forth on email with Paul Clayton from Oxford. Dr. Clayton always has some exciting insights and is really a nutritional expert, a kind of a pharmacogenomic and pharmaconutritionist, as he calls himself, and points out that many of the things that have happened with processed food and just the poor food we've been exposed to, especially since World War II, has really hurt us in many ways. And what we've seen with COVID-19, which has affected so many of us, really has taken the risk factors for Alzheimer's, all of these comorbidities, the obesity, the type 2 diabetes, the poor immunity and things like this, poor nutrition, that are risk factors for Alzheimer's, and has compressed it from 30 years down to 2 weeks. So now so many people are having poor outcomes because of the same sorts of risk factors that we have for cognitive decline.
Wow. Okay, so what you're saying is because they've got those. I mean, I read some study in the news a couple of months ago about the Apoe4 gene and coronavirus. Yeah. What you're saying is because they've got the risk factors for dementia, it then means that they have a worse outcome with coronavirus as well.
That's exactly right. And Dr. Jeffrey Bland has called this the pandemic within the pandemic. And I think he makes a good point. We are in the midst of a long pandemic. Certainly Alzheimer's is a pandemic. It's a pandemic and has been on the rise dramatically for years. And so, in fact, what's happening is there is this ongoing pandemic where we have poor outcomes, we have more Alzheimer's. There's a dramatic increase in Parkinson's over the last decade, just continuing to increase. Metabolic disease, all of these things are so critical. And now within these, we're getting a short-term pandemic with COVID-19. And so we're seeing the same sorts of weaknesses in the immune system, weaknesses with insulin signaling, weaknesses, just poor health, poor nutrition, low hormonal values, low trophic factor values, immunosenescence, leaky gut, abnormal microbiomes. These things are affecting all of us. And so, of course, over time, it's harder to see. But now when you crunch this down, you compress it into those couple of weeks with COVID-19. I mean, look what's happening in the United States. Is obviously Great Britain has had its own issues. Italy obviously has done much better now after going through a really difficult time. Brazil obviously having major problems right now. So part of this is reflective of the fact that so many of us are in poor health. We are easy marks for SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah. Well, actually, we had it here, me and my partner. Weirdly, we can't confirm that. We both did antibody tests, and she came up positive, and I came up negative. But we both had the same symptoms at the same time, so I think we probably did both have it. But maybe we'll get onto that.
You know, that's an interesting point, because one of the points that's been made is that, of course, with viruses, you have to look at both the humoral and the cellular immune system, and we typically just check the humoral side of the immune system, of course. And again, this comes back to Alzheimer's disease. In both of these diseases, you have the innate system being active chronically, activated, and so you've got, of course, the cytokine storm with COVID-19. In Alzheimer's, though, you've got the same sort of thing, chronic, mild activation of the innate system with a poor response on the adaptive side. With COVID-19, you're absolutely right, there are many people who are antibody negative, but T cell positive. So on their cellular side of the immune system, they are recognizing the virus. And in general, response to viruses and recovery from viruses it's more important what your cellular immunity actually is. So this may actually explain some of these mysteries about why people are losing or not finding, not picking up the antibody responses, because the humoral side is not active, or at least not demonstrably active, whereas the cellular side is still active against the virus.
Yeah, and certainly in my family, there's two separate couples who live together and are together, and one has tested positive and one has tested negative. So that definitely backs up what you say. There's one more question I want to kind of big picture question, and I want to kind of get into it. What does the medical establishment say to your work, and what science do you kind of show them to back up what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, as a lifetime academician, it's been really surprising and interesting for me to see what's happened, because, of course, I went into academics because I felt that academics is where the truth lies. It's where the vision lies. It's where the future lies. We are all trying to understand 21st century medicine and leave 20th century medicine behind. 20th century medicine is about diagnosis, and it's about essentially what the disease is, and then writing a prescription for the disease, whether it's hypertension, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's Parkinson's. We wait for symptoms to appear. We say, here's the diagnosis. We give a monotherapy. This has failed in virtually all chronic illnesses. 21st century medicine is completely different. It is about why you have the problem. And of course, human beings are complicated organisms, and so you have to look at a much larger data set. You have to look at all the different contributors. Right now, with cognitive decline, we look at 150 different variables, and in the long run, that's going to be tiny. It will ultimately be millions. That's where things are headed: whole genomes, microbiomes, on and on and on. But you want to know whether there's ongoing inflammation, specific pathogens, specific toxins, specific vascular abnormalities. I mentioned earlier sleep apnea. You want to know that. UARS, which is upper airway resistance syndrome. You want to know about the oral microbiome. You want to know about a history of head trauma, insulin resistance and glycotoxicity. All these sorts of things are critical. So when we first reported this back in 2014, that you can look at all these things and actually get improvements, of course, the response from the community was, that's not the way we do things. We look at a small data set and we write a prescription for Aricept or Namenda or things like that. So what's interesting is we're having a lot of pushback. As they say, things change. You've got the three. You've got the three phases. Phase one, they ignore the change. Phase two, they push back against it, which is where we are right now. Lots of pushback. And then phase three is ultimately they say, oh, we've known this all along. So we'll get there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's obvious. Of course, we have to have larger data sets. Of course, Alzheimer's is a treatable condition, and people still are writing, every day, untreatable, nothing you can do, while we're publishing hundreds of cases with people who have improved. And so, in fact, we have a book set to come out next year, which is called The First Survivors of Alzheimer's Disease, and which has first-person stories from several different survivors and what it was like to be told that they had Alzheimer's, that there was nothing to do, and then to get much better and stay much better. They're sustainably better. We have people who are now over 8 years on the protocol and doing very, very well. So what we are doing is, first of all, publishing the results to show here are before and after. Here we see improvements in MRI volumetrics. We see improvements in cognitive scores. We see improvements in electrophysiology, things like P300B and quantitative EEG and things like that. So these are all just showing, in fact, that we can get improvement, which again doesn't mean every single person improves, but we have many who improve. And so now we are in the middle, because all the stuff we've published, of course, these are all cases, anecdotes. We tried to do the first comprehensive trial back in 2012. We were turned down by the IRBs. We actually have applied again in 2018, turned down again. And then 2019, we were finally approved. So in 2019, we started the first trial in history, which is set to finish this December, in which instead of predetermining a treatment, and again, if you just think about it for 30 seconds, you realize it makes absolutely no sense to try to predetermine a treatment for a disease that has so many different variable contributions. So this is kind of like saying, your car may have low gas, low oil, low transmission fluid, a couple of tires that are low, and you're going to predetermine, okay, we're just going to fill up the gas tank, or we're just going to give transmission fluid. Well, that's not going to help some cars. You want to look at all these different things. It's obvious to a mechanic, but it hasn't been obvious, unfortunately, to the neurological community that continues to treat this by waiting for symptoms and then giving a drug, which again makes no sense. So we're in the midst now of the trial.
Is that trial? These trials are quite expensive, aren't they?
Well, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, the fortunate part though is you don't have to do many. You don't have to do a $50 million or $100 million trial the first go round. You can start with small numbers. So again, each time we publish something, the response is, well, that's not enough people. Well, and it's funny to me, we've got people who have absolutely nothing to offer this disease who are saying, oh, the stuff you've published is just anecdote. Well, yeah, it's better than nothing. This is kind of like saying to Wilbur and Orville Wright, you didn't stay up long enough. Well, hey, we're in the air, okay? We'll get there.
Yeah.
Give us a chance, and then these people are saying, you didn't stay up long enough, and by the way, we're working on lead balloons, and one of them is going to fly. No, the lead balloons are not flying. They're not going to fly. Yeah. And so, it would be great if one day we have a single drug that does everything for Alzheimer's. But we now know it would have to do a lot of different things. Yeah. Dozens and dozens and dozens of different biochemical effects. That's a tall order for a drug. We actually believe that the drugs are going to work better when you do them on the background of a personalized program that is a precision medicine program. Precision medicine is working fairly well for cancer. It is the way of the future, and it's basically what we're doing. We're looking at all the different things that are driving the decline mechanistically and then addressing those. So that is the way of the future. That is precision medicine.
And the reason that I've always bought into what you do so much is the fact that I know on a short-term basis, when I do the things that I know agree with me, my brain works better minute to minute, let alone long-term. Just simply meditating, for example, makes me feel so much better in certain foods. So that's why I kind of feel, well, it would work long-term as well.
Isn't that interesting? So there's another study that hasn't been published yet, but has just been completed. So very excited about that. And what it's showing is very much like what you're saying. So when we're dealing with people who are on the spiral down of cognitive decline, and you really have to pull out all the stops, and you need to get them into mild ketosis, and you need to address any sleep apnea, and you need to address all the things that are driving this because they are on the wrong side of that synaptoblastic, synaptoclastic balance. But when you take people who are actually still, quote, normal, still doing things, they may not be peak, they're doing the best for them, but they're doing well. And then you do the same sorts of things, even a small number of them, then they do better. And there was a trial now that was completed not long ago separately that was looking at several different supplements that actually look at and address some of the things that are typically wrong. And they were including some of the basics of exercise and changing diet and improving sleep. And these people just did dramatically better. It was striking to see how much they improved.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to when that's published. But what we see again and again, and as you go farther and farther along, it is harder and harder. You are literally are on a spiral down. So you can make a difference for people who are farther along. But it's actually quite easy, as you indicated. You mentioned one thing, meditation, and you're doing better. And that's the sort of thing we see. It is easier to improve a brain that's doing well already than it is to improve a brain that is spiraling downhill. And we probably shouldn't be surprised by that, but it really does show that this sort of program is something that we should all be contemplating, especially those of us who are over 40.
Well, let's look at some of the aspects of what you recommend then. I know that one of your things is kind of saturated fats, and diet is very important. talk about short term, I went out yesterday and I had a cooked breakfast, and I have to say it was a very basic restaurant, Dale. I didn't realise, we went for a little morning's walk in Windsor, and we didn't realise we were going to eat out there, and I didn't realise how basic the food was going to be when it got delivered to my plate. But, you know, I'm not quite sure what that hash brown was cooked in, but I dread to think, really, some kind of oil. And funnily enough, I do feel a bit fuzzy-headed today. How important is getting diet right, and what are the kind of principal things that you look at with diet?
Well, you know, there's actually a tremendous amount of published data on diet. So it's something that you don't have to speculate about. It's pretty clear. And as you know, things like Mediterranean diet, Mind diet, and what we published is called the Keto Flex 12-3. So again, we're just trying to drive you to a biochemistry that actually works better for your brain. And what is that biochemistry? Well, number one, it is mild ketosis, and getting people in the 1.0 to 4.0 millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate. We're actually working with a group now on a breathalyzer that we hope will make it much easier. But so far, the best way to check your ketones, no question, is through your blood. A little finger stick, not difficult. Lots of people doing it.
Now, those breathalyzers are okay, but they don't work brilliantly, do they?
That's the issue so far. So the group is claiming that they're getting just as good a results with this as with finger sticks. We'll see. We're in the midst of testing that right now, so we'll know something quite quickly here. And then secondly, as you know, things like polyphenols and many of the nutrients that are coming from a plant-rich diet. Doesn't have to be all plants. It can be plant-rich, small amounts, fish, and pastured chicken and grass-fed beef. These are all great. And in fact, one of the things that I've been doing during COVID-19, which I find very helpful, is use Chronometer. It's easy to use. It's like Chronometer, like a watch, but simply without the H. And it's free, and you can look and see, where do I stand with these various nutrients. These things are so helpful and so critical for your brain. So you do want to get good fats. And although we do start people who are on the downward spiral with getting their ketones, even if it takes some MCT oil, saturated fats, and now, by the way, there's some wonderful exogenous ketones that are out there. KE1, one that I've been using recently, which I find very nice, but there are others that people use. Ketone salts and ketone esters. KE1 is a combination of those two, but there are others. And again, just helping. In the long run, you want to get into endogenous ketosis, but in the short run, just to get things rolling, you can start with exogenous ketosis, and then you can move over and do it endogenously after a few months. So these are critical pieces. And then I mentioned the flexitarian part. Again, meat or no meat, but make sure that you get enough good fats. You want to get somewhere around down only to 10 or 15% of your calories coming from carbs, and you want these to be complex carbs, not simple carbs. And then your protein, you want to get somewhere around 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram of protein. And then you want to get the rest of your calories from good fats, things like avocados and polyunsaturates and things like that.
And presumably combining the fats and the carbs is really not a good thing.
So you don't you don't want to be. This is exactly why you want to go out and hurt your brain, have a cheeseburger and some fries and a Coke. That'll definitely get you going on the right track to having poor cognition. And again, this has been published repeatedly. This is nothing new. Yeah. It's just something where so many doctors tell you, it's not really that important. And I was taught that in medical school. It's not a big deal. It's all about writing the right prescriptions. And it turns out that in fact it's a huge deal, as you know. And I noticed the same. Just getting up, doing more exercise on a routine basis, clearly helpful. Again, sleep, something we all it's a badge of courage, badge of honor. Hey, we didn't get much sleep last night because we were working so hard. Well, you're actually, you're hurting yourself. You're not going to be able to work as efficiently. And then one of the common ones that, again, we forget about is how important stress really is. Working with one person who unfortunately has one of the rare cases of familial Alzheimer's disease with a specific rare mutation, and everyone in the family with that mutation gets very severe Alzheimer's disease, typically in their 40s. Very unfortunate. And she's doing great, by the way. And one of the interesting things, she notices the differences when the big thing for her is stress. So stress just up and down actually does make a difference. It's clear for her. But many people notice when things are stressful, especially if you have stress for several days or weeks or months, you're not thinking as well. You're not doing as well. And by the way, your hippocampus can show it. People actually, lots of stress associated with brain atrophy. So all of these things do combine with the outcome for your brain. So there's a tremendous amount we can all do.
Yeah, the stress is a really interesting one, and I wear one of these Oura rings. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they measure your heart. Yeah, they measure your heart rate and your heart rate variability, and it often seems quite random why my heart rate variability is so much lower on some nights than other nights. But the two things that I think make a massive difference are eating early in the evening, and over a perhaps weeks period, going on a long holiday or being a little bit less stressed. And I see the benefits long after the holiday's finished, although it does eventually come down again. I don't know if that's something that would tally with your experience.
So you brought up such a critical point, and this really is about the quantified self. As you know, the quantified self is becoming a big thing. People are looking more at their everything from their blood pressures to their heart rate variability, to their oxygen saturation, especially with COVID-19 out there. Lots of people, and of course, you can do your oxygen saturation on your iPhone, but you can also look at it through the night, something called Better as an example, and all in their microbiome and their holobiome, their oral microbiome, their gut microbiome. These are things that we're all beginning to look at. And one of the things that I noticed early on, people did better with their cognition if they were people who were very sensitive to their own changes. So to some extent, they were noticing the changes. And Julie G., who founded Apoe4.info, is a great example of this. She'll add one or subtract one thing and notice, oh yeah, I'm a little bit better today, or this didn't work as well. And it really helps people over time to capture those things that are the most important for them. Because as you can imagine, with each one of us, we're operating with a different rate limiting step or set of rate limiting steps. For some people, it is the nocturnal oxygen saturation. For other people, it is healing the gut. It is the microbiome of the gut or the leakiness of the gut in some cases. For other people, it's improving their blood pressure. On and on and on. And so as we begin to quantify these things, people are noticing exactly what you said. And by the way, I noticed the same thing. I've been checking my own blood pressure a lot with all the, being up all night during my internship and residency, especially with a lot of travel and things like that. I will go up and down with this. And I notice, when I'm doing the right things, it's so much better, so much more stable, et cetera. And sometimes you'll say, gee, I wonder why it crept up a little or it was actually better than I imagined at this time. So, and again, the old idea, don't worry about it. Just take a pill and circumvent all the physiological things that are ongoing. Again, it makes no sense, and yet it's what we're doing. We're just telling people, don't bother to look for what the problem is. Just take a pill. And we really, again, in the 21st century, want to look for what's actually causing these things. We want to address them physiologically. We want to address them upstream, because we get much better long-term outcomes when we do that.
Yeah, I certainly think I fall into that category of being more attuned to when I feel good and when I don't feel good now. So my work schedule's been rather hectic lately, and I'm noticing it can start to wear me down a bit. Even when you're doing all the right stuff and you're doing the workouts and you're meditating and everything else, you sometimes notice that your stress levels get a bit high. Nobody likes feeling stressed out, and even worse, it can affect the way that you do your work, even the people around you, if you're not keeping on top of it. And I find that one of the things that does help with that is sorting out my magnesium levels. Superdosing with magnesium. This nutrient is responsible for 300 to 600 different biochemical reactions in the body, including the metabolism. And when your magnesium levels are low, you struggle with sleep, energy, metabolism, pain, and stress. You can get magnesium from food, and by and large I'm a big fan of getting magnesium and all our minerals from food, but the problem is the way that our food is these days, there's not enough magnesium in there. So before you go and research magnesium supplements, know this: not all magnesium supplements are full spectrum, meaning they don't all have 7 forms of magnesium that you need. Luckily, one does, and that is Magnesium Breakthrough. As I walk past a building site, as I stroll around London recording this podcast, let me tell you about Magnesium Breakthrough. It's a complete formula that includes naturally derived forms of all 7 forms of supplemental magnesium. Doesn't contain any synthetic additives or preservatives. It's pure as anything. It definitely works. I take it every day. Well, almost every day. I mean, sometimes you forget, but yeah, I'd say 6 days out of 7 I take it, and I definitely feel better on it. I'm tracking it at the moment to see how I feel and whether it affects my sleep as well, and how it affects my sleep. But I definitely think this is my number 1 magnesium supplement, possibly my all-time favorite magnesium supplement. It's so pure. It's got all the 7 types of magnesium as well, and you can get 10% off with a special Zestology coupon code when you visit bioptimizers.co.uk. Use the code Zestology10 to get 10% off. If you're anywhere else in the world apart from the UK, just head to bioptimizers.com, use the same code, you'll get 10% off. And let me know how you feel. I recommend using it for 30 days. See how it affects your stress and your mood and your relaxation levels. Use the code Zestology10 for 10% off. That's it, back to the show. Just one more question on diet then, because I do think eating earlier in the evening makes a difference. And also I know that I probably eat a slightly higher carb diet than I used to when I last spoke to you, but we still do like butter and olive oil and fats in general. I suppose that is bad to combine the two.
Well, again, it depends on what sort of carbs you're having. If you're having complex carbs, not a problem. You don't want to overdo it. And again, you could check your ketones and see where you stand.
Yeah.
But Professor Robert Lustig has pointed out, the human organism can do pretty well with complex carbs, and there are societies that have done that, and long-lived societies over the years. And you can also do well with a high, especially high good fats diet. That's fine too. You don't want to do a lot of combining. You don't want to kind of overwhelm your mitochondria going both directions at once. And especially, of course, the big boogeyman that everybody points out is the simple carbs. And again,
So what is that, like white bread and pasta and stuff like that?
It's the white bread, it's the pasta, the things that are spiking your glucose. And by the way, another thing that has been on the Quantified Self that's been so helpful for people is continuous glucose monitoring, CGM. And I don't know if you've tried this yet.
I haven't, but I'd love to. Yeah.
Great idea, because again, just as you're seeing with your Oura Ring, you're seeing changes with your heart rate variability. You will see and be surprised by dramatic changes. You wear it for 2 weeks on your arm. Pretty easy to do. You can still do everything else in your life. It's not a big problem. And you'll see what is spiking your glucose up, and you'll also see when it is dropping down. And we're being surprised. We have one woman, for example, who was wondering why it is she's waking up in the middle of the night. What she found was she would be spiking her glucose up with some of the things she thought were healthy, such as granola, that sort of thing. Turns out not such a good idea. She's spiking it up. And then at night, what would happen, she would go to bed, and because she hadn't had a kind of a fat bomb and hadn't really had this kind of smoothing of her glucose, in the middle of the night, she would drop down into the 40s and 50s. And so therefore, what does her body do? It responds by making more adrenaline, trying to push that glucose back up to prevent her from getting significant hypoglycemia. Very brain damaging, of course. And so she would wake up in the middle of the night, and now with the continuous glucose monitoring, she realized, aha, this is why I woke up in the night. So now she is changing her diet. She is smoothing things out so that she doesn't drop into the 40s and 50s at night with this reactive hypoglycemia.
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to try that. And lots of people in this kind of, health biohacking community have posted pictures of themselves on Instagram with one. So I think it'd be fascinating to find out. And in terms of kind of supplements, I mean, one of the things that I've been investigating a lot over the last year or two is histamine intolerance, and that's something that I've got to a certain extent, thankfully not too bad, but it means that omega-3s, the classic supplements, I'd have a bit of a negative reaction, to be honest. Are there any other sources that you would recommend apart from kind of cod liver oil or kind of fish oils?
Yeah, certainly there's krill, things like that. But yeah, now, do you have a poor response to all of the various polyunsaturates or not?
So polyunsaturates, things like olive oil as well, yeah?
Well, what happens if you eat salmon? Do you
Oh,
have if you eat fatty fish, you get in all sorts of other sources of omega-3s. I happen to like chia seeds myself.
oh yeah, yeah.
And get a great way to get now. Those are shorter chains, of course, and your body does not convert all of them into the longer chains. But another wonderful way to go. And in fact, chia seed pudding, you can make it so that it has very, very little carb in there, and simple carb, no added simple carb, and make it so it's fantastic for fiber. It's fantastic for omega-3s. It's fantastic as a source of zinc. Great stuff. And of course, again, fiber, something that people have kind of underappreciated over the years, how incredibly important it is. One of the really interesting points made by Paul Clayton is that if you look at what's happened with our diets, we are probably producing something like an order of magnitude lower of butyrate, which is critical, coming from your gut microbiome, than we should be, and than we used to, because of our current diet. So, in fact, have you had any problem with things like chia seeds or with things like salmon, things like that?
I love a bit of chia seeds. I don't eat that much salmon anymore, simply because fish is normally very high histamine. But I could certainly give it a go again. I'm basing it really on the omega-3 supplements that I've tried, which is a kind of cod liver oil one and a algae one as well. But I could certainly do plenty of chia seed pudding. And the other thing that I got recommended was there is a company now that makes patches that you could put on your skin and you absorb transdermally the supplement. So I wonder if it's not going into the gut, if I would absorb it kind of better and more effectively.
It's possible, yeah. And it's also possible that, with changes in your microbiome, you may be less intolerant. So that would be another possibility. But yeah, so I would certainly try those. And then the other point is that there are, as you know, there are different preparations of omega-3s. So you might consider something like krill oil, something like that. And certainly Rhonda Patrick has written a paper about the different formulations of omega-3s, and she believes that the one formulation is more critical for people with Apoe4. So that's another thing to think about.
Oh, interesting. Okay, and then what about you mentioned Resveratrol to me before, and I think you talked about it with Rhonda Patrick as well, and I had David Sinclair on this podcast who mentioned it as well. Is that still something that is part of your recommendations in the new book?
It is, because again, one of the things that's happening with cognitive decline, and we see it more and more, is energy failure. And you can measure that by looking at the PET scans. So the FDG PET scans, the fluorodeoxyglucose PET scans, will show with ApoE4 individuals, even into your 20s, they will show a decrease in the utilization of glucose in the temporal and parietal regions. It kind of looks like an L on each side of your head. And then you see that, of course, more severely as people are approaching Alzheimer's disease. But there are changes even early, and people with beginning cognitive decline will show this reduction in energetics. This is in part a mitochondrial disease, and with mitochondrial utilization, again, Parkinson's even more so. Parkinson's, clearly you have this inhibition of mitochondrial complex 1. So we want to now bridge that energy gap. And a good way to do that is with a significant amount of ketosis. And we talked about that, 1 to 4, certainly 1 to 4 millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate, very helpful. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that we support that. And there are multiple ways to do that. Again, using all these things together is helpful. So part of it is the diet. Resveratrol really has the interesting effect of taking your sirtuins, especially SIRT1, which when you produce your SIRT, it is actually in an auto-inhibitory state. So it's a little bit like having a gun in a holster. It's not doing its job yet. When you add the resveratrol, that is relieving this auto-inhibitory state. So you're now getting the impact. And by the way, you also get the impact, of course, by increasing your NAD. And you can do that with things like nicotinamide riboside. So these two together actually work quite nicely. You're getting two different impacts to try to improve your energy level and your SIRT1. And I have to say, I was skeptical about SIRT1's role with the Alzheimer's pathophysiology until we started looking at it in the laboratory years ago. And you could actually see quite strikingly, as an example, SIRT1 leads to an increase in the alpha secretase activity. So you're taking your amyloid precursor protein and you're driving it down the path that you want, which is to make more of the alpha CTF and SAPP alpha. This is the signaling that supports the production and maintenance of synapses. The other side, of course, when you're driving it down the side for the SAPP beta and, of course, the A beta, that is the pro-Alzheimer's side. And what we're really saying is it's not there. Your body's not doing this to give you Alzheimer's. Your body is doing it to fight insults. And unfortunately, when we have these various insults, the very things we've been talking about, from sleep apnea to having various pathogens that get into your brain. You look in the brain of Alzheimer's patients, you find everything from candida to borrelia to P. gingivalis from your mouth to herpes simplex. It is really about dealing with insults. And so we want to get rid of those insults and now drive your signaling back to the positive side with the SAPP alpha. And resveratrol helps to do that, as does the nicotinamide riboside.
Okay, I'll definitely give them a go again, I think. And I mean, you talked a bit earlier about how you can become kind of more attuned to the differences. And certainly one of the differences I noticed recently was I just mentally didn't feel very sharp. And I know this because when you work in TV, if you're reading an auto cue, for example, and you keep slipping up on your words, that's a pretty good indication. And I was waking up quite a bit in the middle of the night, especially early in the morning. And then I realized that I'd kind of really dropped my methylation supplements, reintroduced them, and almost felt an instant change and noticed a massive improvement in performance at work as well. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it, that you can get so much feedback just from one supplement like that?
Absolutely. And, again, people over the years say, oh, it's placebo effect. Well, of course, there can be a degree of that. But you can measure, you can measure your homocysteine. You can look and see what your B12 status is. You can look at your status of methylation, look at your folate, and you can see changes, again, in real time, looking at things like CNS vital signs. We use CNS vital signs as a sort of a sensitive indicator of status of cognitive function. But hey, if you don't believe in that, do electrophysiology. Do some simple look at your quantitative EEG, look at your P300B, and see if your P300B is actually now moving to be more rapid. Look at your brain HQ. All these things straightforward to do with the electrophysiology. Of course, you have to do it with your doctor, but these things are, again, part of the quantified self. And this idea that, it's all in your, it's just all in your head. It's all, it's all in your head figuratively instead of literally. It really hasn't helped. And so you can look at these things. And in fact, we all know when we haven't slept for a few nights, and I remember this from my internship days very well. I would miss not just one night, I would miss entire nights, like 2, 3 in a row.
Yeah.
And just, I would fall asleep at the drop of a hat. You simply are not thinking as well. You can measure it. You can show that. And so as you're improving things like your methylation, and by the way, I think the best studies out of methylation and their effects on cognitive decline were done in the UK, showing that, in fact, as your homocysteine creeps up, that is directly associated with an increase in the rapidity, actually, the accelerating decline in your volumetrics, in your brain. And when you now improve that methylation, you now flatten the curve.
Yeah.
You now are losing that accelerated decline in your hippocampal volume and in your overall gray matter volume.
Certainly, I've had high homocysteine in the past, for sure. I probably need to test it again, actually. I mean, you saying that, I'm writing a list of recommendations, and that is probably one thing I will get tested again, I think.
Great thing to know. So, and you're mentioning single variables here. As you can imagine, when you address these various variables, you really get a much better outcome. And as I mentioned earlier, people will again poo-poo this and say, oh, well, this one thing is not a big deal. Well, okay, but for each of us has a different set of rate-limiting steps, as I mentioned earlier. And so getting at those rate-limiting steps, you may be someone where methylation is a critical determinant. And you, in fact, you're noticing improvements in your cognition. What you're not noticing, you may actually have just improved your volumetrics for your hippocampus. So these things all go hand in hand. And simply putting our heads in the sand, which is what's happened over the years, and pretending that they don't exist, this old idea, oh, you're just having a senior moment, come back next year. I can't tell you how many patients I've dealt with who've been told by their doctors, yeah, you're not that bad yet, come back next year. And they do that for 2 or 3 years, then the doctor says, oh, you have Alzheimer's, there's nothing I can do now. I mean, it's really been kind of a caveman approach over the year. It's really been very, very sad.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more question on supplements, and then we'll wrap it up. TMG is something that when I start with those methylation supplements back again, I introduced that. I didn't really know what it was, but I think I saw it on the site you mentioned earlier, Apoe4.info, and that's left me feeling great. Is that something that you recommend?
Absolutely. So what we usually recommend, so there are basically five different ways to get at methylation, the final one being your diet, but most people don't need to go that direction. So you can start with B12, folate, and P5P, which is the pyridoxal 5-phosphate. And that's, for most people, that'll get you down. And by the way, the UK studies show you want to be down below 7. A lot of us are walking around 12, 15, 20. We've seen them up, much higher than that. And they are definitely increasing risk for Alzheimer's as it climbs. So if you're hanging out at 12 or 15 or 20, you absolutely want to get it down. And for what kind of B12, it actually depends on your COMT and on your VDR, your vitamin D receptor. And you can actually, there's a simple website to look at with that, looking at what type of B12 to get. For most of us, simply getting methyl B12 is fine. We usually do half methyl, half adenosine. For people who are hypermethylators, typically the ones with COMT mutations, then they're going to want to use hydroxycobalamin instead. Then you want some, typically, again, methylfolate or folate, again, depending on your genome. And again, easy to get that checked now. And then P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. If those don't bring it down, then we do add trimethylglycine. Easy to use. This is also betaine. And then again, this is another pathway to reduce your homocysteine. And typically, you can take 500 milligrams 2 or 3 times a day, and this will help to lower your homocysteine. And we see this all the time with people getting into an optimal range with that combination of those 4 things. If those don't do it, then again, you can start lowering the intake of methionine in your diet. But right. You don't necessarily, for the vast majority of people, you don't have to do that. And again, you've been mentioning supplements. They are supplementary, of course. These, the other basics, your diet and exercise and sleep and stress and brain training and things like this are the beginnings. And supplements are there to be supplementary. They can help you. So many people will say, just tell me the supplements. That's all I want to do. Well, It doesn't work nearly as well if you're not, no surprise, if you're just popping pills.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot more questions, but I'm going to wait for your book for that. Final question is, what is one book that you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy? You've already mentioned chia seed pudding, so you can't have that one.
Yeah. Great point. I would say the one thing for living with more energy for the majority of people, unless you're, too thin, is going to be some appropriate fasting, and try 12, 16 hours in that range, 12 to 16 hours, and do some exercise during that time, which will generate some ketosis. And getting in, doing some swimming, doing some jogging, some basic things like that, and you will notice. You'll notice clarity. You'll notice improvements. You'll notice improvements in your energy. All these things are critical. So that's one thing that I find very helpful.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I feel a lot sharper before lunch than after, actually, to be honest.
yeah, exactly. And we all know that. And if you don't like that, give a try of some KE1 or one of these things. And again, I have nothing to do with that company. I don't receive anything from them. I just happen to like it myself.
Okay, great.
For books, I have to say there were. I hope you'll permit me two. There are two that I read recently that I thought were really interesting. Of the others, one is a prescription for action ending Parkinson's disease, which I thought was a very good book and really looked at why we are at such risk. This is a dramatically increasing risk. Parkinson's disease is on the rise, as is Alzheimer's. And people are sitting back and saying, oh, we're getting this. We don't know what causes it. Let's continue to try to treat it. Instead of looking at, hey, what are we doing? What's going on in our societies that are increasing this? And one of many things, for example, people in Silicon Valley living near these Superfund dump sites, not realizing how they are being exposed to these toxins that have clearly been linked to Parkinson's disease risk, and many of them getting Parkinson's.
What is that? So there are big, like refuse?
Yeah, dump sites. And by the way, they're all over Silicon Valley and other places as well.
Yeah.
And not realizing that their houses are built on these things.
Oh, dear.
And so people get exposed to trichloroethylene, to paraquat, to perchloroethylene, to Agent Orange. We're seeing people with glyphosate exposures, although that wasn't mentioned specifically in the book. So read the book. It's a very interesting book. And the other one I'm just in the middle of reading actually right now is called The Gene Guillotine. And it is by Kate Preskenis, and about her own family that has a specific mutation associated with Alzheimer's. I have to say, such a heartfelt book, an earnest look at what it feels like to know that members of your family are on the way to Alzheimer's disease. And really, to me, gives you a feeling of, we've really got to do something about this. We've got to do better in our prevention and reversal of cognitive decline.
Yeah, absolutely. Dale, both of those sound really good. Thank you so much. It's I can't wait for your book to come out. And well, we're recording this in July, but it's out in August. Am I right in saying that?
It's on August 18th.
August 18th.
Thank you.
Yeah. A mere kind of 9 months after I pre-ordered it on Amazon. But there you go. We'll make sure that this comes out around that week. In the meantime, thanks so much for all your work. It's really, I've got a list of things to go and action now. I'll be looking at oxygen saturation and CGM and chia seed pudding and T cells and all the rest of it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And best regards, best luck with all the things that you're doing.
Thanks to Dale. Thank you for listening to Zestology. I think one of the most important guests that I've had on Zestology, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he's come back on, and can't wait to read his second book as well. Let me know how you get on with that. And remember, Magnesium Breakthrough is the podcast sponsor for today's show. My partner rather than my sponsor, because I've definitely been partnering up with Magnesium Breakthrough and very much enjoying it as well. I've been involved with it for the last few months now, and feeling quite a difference actually. I think my inflammation levels are going down. I think that's one of the main reasons that you might want to use magnesium. I'm also doing quite a bit of tracking on the magnesium levels within the Oura app with the tags feature, and I'm hoping soon to reveal how that's worked in terms of my sleep tracking. If you'd like to get involved with Magnesium Breakthrough, now might be the time. If you don't take a magnesium supplement already, then head to bioptimizers.co.uk or bioptimizers.com and just check it out. See if you can, see if you're interested by all the different things that a magnesium supplement with 7 different forms of supplemental magnesium can do. And remember to use the code Zestology10 when you check out as well, because that'll get you 10% off, which can be quite a big chunk of change. So Zestology10, and it's bioptimizers.co.uk if you're in the UK, or bioptimizers.com with a Z if you're anywhere else in the world. Thanks for listening. It's lovely strolling around London in midsummer when the weather's like this. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously 2020 has just been the strangest, oddest year of all time, hasn't it? And at the moment life seems okay and kind of, you know, fairly manageable despite all the restrictions. I know, so obviously not just in this country, it's every country in the world. There's so many things are different from normal. It all seems quite manageable. You know, we went and got a coffee this morning and we ordered it outside and we sat outside and we drank it outside. In the middle of winter when it's -3 down by this river where I'm walking at the moment, it's not quite as pleasant, and I won't be strolling around in a pair of flip-flops and a t-shirt. So we'll see how that works then, but at the moment life feels okay, and I hope it is for you too. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. And just before you go, in the next couple of weeks, I've got Greg Potter on optimizing sleep and circadian rhythms and the number 1 time to eat dinner in the evening, and biohacking a type A personality with Angela Foster. That's coming up in the next couple of weeks. I'll see you then.